Hello and welcome to the video. In this video, we will go through step 6 of the walkthrough series of SAP UI5 documentation, and we'll talk about modules. So what are modules? Any JavaScript file which can be loaded and executed by the browser is called a module. A module can contain any sort of code, and there is no restriction on what type of code can go into a module and what type of code cannot go into a module. It is totally dependent on the developer. In SAP UI5, it provides built-in framework for modularizing our SAP UI5 applications. What this means is that instead of having one big JavaScript file with all our code of the application written in only one file, we can split that code into smaller number of parts into different JavaScript files, and we can call them and load those files at runtime as and when needed. These JavaScript files are called as modules. In this step, we'll replace the alert from the last exercise with a proper message toast from the sap.m.library. Basically, we are going to load the message toast module from sap.m.library in our SAP UI5 application, and we are going to show a message hello world to the user. Again, you can download the code for this step from this particular link. Now, having a look at the controller file, from the definition of modules, we understand that any JavaScript file which can be loaded and executed in the browser is a module. So yes, our controller file is a module. Now, to define a module, the syntax which we have to use is sap.ui.define. In this function, we can provide a name for our module, and then we provide a list of dependencies for our module. In this case, the list of dependencies which needed to be loaded for our module are controller and message toast. Here you can see we extend the array of required modules with the fully qualified path to sap.m.messagetoast. Now in this case, once both these dependencies are loaded successfully, the callback function will get triggered. In the callback function, we pass the objects of both the modules which we need for our application. One important thing to note here is that the loading of these dependent modules using sap.ui.define statement is always asynchronous. It is referred to as the asynchronous module definition syntax, which allows to clearly separate the module loading from the code execution and greatly improves the performance of the application. Here you can see that the loading of these two modules is asynchronous, and once the modules are loaded successfully, after that only our code gets executed. So this is the only code change in this step as compared to the last step. And now we can run this application in Visual Studio Code and see the output. I have already downloaded the application and opened this project in Visual Studio Code. Here you can see the app controller.js file. Now to run this application locally, I have executed the npm install command. Now I will run the UI5 serve command. Now, when we click on this button, we see a message toast, hello world. This message is coming from the onShowHello event handler function. And inside this function, the message toast is getting displayed by making use of the message toast module. Important thing to note here is that this app.controller.js file is a module in itself, because we are using this syntax sap.ui.define here. And this module or this controller file is making use of the controller and the message toast modules in the execution of the code. Now coming back to conventions which are mentioned in the documentation, we use SAP UI define for controllers and all other JavaScript modules to define a global namespace. With the namespace, the object can be addressed throughout the application. What this means is that here we have defined this module for app controller.js file. Now this module has been defined in the global namespace, and this module or this file can be used in any other controller file or any other JavaScript file of this application. At the same time, we are also loading the other dependent modules asynchronously, which are needed for our JavaScript file. There is another syntax called sap.ui.require, which also basically asynchronously loads dependencies, but without declaring a namespace. For example, code that just needs to be executed, but does not need to be called from other code. So we use sap.ui.require also to asynchronously load dependencies, but we cannot declare a namespace using sap.ui.require, or we can say that we cannot define a new module using sap.ui.require statement. We can define a new module only using the sap.ui.define statement. So this is what I wanted to cover in step 6 of the walkthrough series. In the next video, we'll go through step 7, which is about JSON models. Until then, thank you for watching this video and have a nice day.